we're joined by Catherine Rabess, who is a dietitian, and she's just going to tell us a little bit about what she does, and we'll get into a bit more information about how she could give some advice and some tips on how we can change our lifestyle in terms of our eating habits. So, Catherine, I've got you on the line here. That's
Hello.
Yeah, we had an unfortunate time trying to get our Zoom working, so we're improvising. We're doing some improvising here, so it's working so far.
Yeah, we got there in the end. Hi everyone. My name's Catherine Rabess. I'm a registered dietitian. I've been qualified now for over 10 years. I split my time between working in the NHS, managing a nutrition and dietetic service in Southwest London, and I also do some private practice, doing one-to-one clinics, currently remotely, but also work in a private hospital. My speciality is actually gut health, so gastroenterology and complex nutrition support. And I'm quite passionate about the areas of inflammatory bowel disease, but also improving sort of the diversity in nutrition and dietetics, and putting us on the map, putting Black people on the map in our field as well.
Amazing.
So that's a bit about me.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Catherine. So I guess why I wanted to speak to you is, well, I think in terms of gut health, that's such a massive thing at the moment. It has been for quite a few years. Everyone kind of jumping on the probiotics. I think people are having so many issues with stomach issues in general. I think IBS and these different inflammatory flare-ups are just non-stop. So how are people, especially the Black community, how are we able to differentiate between some solid information that's credible, viable information, and some of these, I guess, I don't know, holistic type, if you drink celery juice it will kind of get rid of bowel cancer and things like that. How do we
that's a really, really good question, and I actually did an article about that in the BBC, and there was sort of 5 tips that we suggested to look out for when you're looking for dietary advice online. Mm-hmm. First thing is, where's your source from? Mm-hmm. So you want to be looking to find out who's actually providing that information. Is it someone in the profession of nutrition and dietetics? So is it a nutritionist or a dietitian? Is it somebody who's a doctor or has some sort of medical scientific background, a professor potentially, or someone who has a PhD in that area, has done research in that area? Or is it somebody who is an influencer or tried the diet before, or has been recommended it from a friend or a family member and has had good results, and now they're trying to suggest that? So first thing is, who's your source? That's really important. The second thing is, depending on what the diet is it backed by science? So it means doing your research, but actually you want to be making sure that it is backed by scientific evidence. A lot of these anecdotal diets that are online and information about, try this, cut this out and it will make you like this, or try this juice, it will do this. A lot of it is not actually backed by science. And it's really important that you know and look for the science behind it. So has there been studies done? The most strongest study you're looking for is like a randomized controlled trial, which is usually a study which is done amongst hundreds of cases of people, thousands maybe, and they are looking at comparisons between one person who's received the diet and then the other person who's received a placebo. So they have a perception that they've received the diet, but actually they're still on the baseline diet potentially. So you want to make sure that you've got some strong science and evidence behind that diet before you would go ahead. That's the second thing.
I was gonna ask in regards to that. When you say like a study has been done on, what is a good study? How many people would have had to have gone under a trial or something for it to be concrete?
Do you know what? That's such a tough question, and because I don't have much research background, and to be honest, any sort of study is great, because it means that there has been a rigorous amount of, whether it be research into it in terms of collecting data, or if it's looking at other studies that have been done. But you want to make sure that it does, I can't say specifically about numbers. I mean, you want to ideally see that the study's been done in humans, because a lot of the time some studies have only been done in animals, or in rats, or different, so, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it may have worked for, the rats, but it does not mean by any means that it would work for a human. So making sure that it's human studies that have been done, or taking it with a pinch of salt if it is that it's been done on animals.
Right. Okay.
So I would say that would be the priority, but also checking that if it's a randomized controlled trial, that's the strongest and that's the gold standard trial.
Right.
Not all are done that way, because it costs a lot of money to do research in that form. But if there's been systematic reviews, so whether somebody has gone and looked through thousands of different articles and papers and studies to see that there's recommendations that could be made, that's another strong way of looking. Yeah.
Great. Brilliant. I was going to, moving on from that, I was going to ask, is there any clinical evidence for, I guess, especially in our community, we kind of, I tend to find a lot more Black people. I say Black as such a broad term, but a lot of Black people are lactose intolerant. I guess what I'm kind of talking about is things like the blood group diet, which says that different ethnicities should be eating certain types of foods. Is there any evidence to support that, evidence behind that, or is it generally a cultural?
That's a fad diet, really, and there's again not enough evidence that supports following those sort of diets. They can be very restrictive as well, and as dietitians, we only base our advice on qualitative information and research that has been done. So to answer your question, the blood group diet is not something that we would recommend to any Black people or people of colour, really, because there's just not enough evidence to support it.
Okay, so what are the differences then? Is it entirely a cultural thing? Is it just that we eat a certain way and that's why we have?
I do think a large part of it is based on poor dietary choices, and sometimes it can be, the type of diet we do have based on our culture can be sometimes quite high in salt, sometimes can be quite high in fat, but that's quite a generic thing to say. That our diets can be really, if I'm talking specifically about Afro-Caribbean diet, it is actually really high in fibre. There's lots of vegetables and lots of fruit as well. So our diets can be healthy, but I do think sometimes we can make poorer food choices, and whether that is something to do with potentially where you're living, if you have not got access to healthy fresh food every day to be able to cook healthy, it could be also even looking at your terms of your economic status.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If you're working really long hours, to have to go home and cook a fresh, potentially healthy meal may not be realistic, and actually getting something quick, fast food, easy and accessible might be something that's more suitable for you. So I think it's sometimes looking at the bigger picture and not just thinking about, this diet is like this, but also looking at all the other things that are associated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely socioeconomic. There's lots of factors, what's available in the area, and kind of there's always a fast food restaurant or takeaway or shop, and these kind of ready meals that have lots of salt in and stuff like that. Have you? So, are there any studies specifically around the Afro diet, as in East, West African, Caribbean? Are there any studies around our diet specifically and how we could
I'm
improve it?
sure, I'm sure there is, but off the top of my head, I couldn't say. It would have to, I'd have to actually go onto a literature website and search for them. But I'm sure there has been studies done based on different, ethnic, cultural, multicultural diets. I'm sure, because as we already know, within Black and ethnic minority groups, we have a higher risk, particularly in black population. We do have a higher risk of diabetes, and they have linked that to our diet. So, by making such a bold statement, that's got to be based on evidence. So I'm sure there are studies, but off the top of my head, I wouldn't know them.
So, in regards to COVID, we know that a large number of Black people who've died from COVID have had type 2 diabetes and or hypertension. So what kind of I think what we're trying to do as a service is we're trying to kind of look at some of those higher risk factors and just seeing what we can do as a community to take control of some of the results, the outcomes. So in regards to those two pre-existing medical illnesses, what advice or tips could you give to somebody watching? To me, I need to know as well, because I have high pressure too. So
Okay. So I mean, I guess you sort of want to put it into different categories as well, because hypertension, so high blood pressure, your diet would be slightly different to somebody who might have diabetes, for example. But ultimately, they are all healthy. You need to eat healthier. So if we're looking at somebody who does have high blood pressure, which of course that increases your risk of developing, heart disease, cardiovascular problems, you want to be reducing your salt intake. So you want to be, if you're using sort of all-purpose seasoning or any pre-made seasoning, they can be really, really high in salt. If you're using Maggi seasoning, for example, they're really, really, really high in salt. So if you're adding those seasonings and then adding salt on top of that,
and soya sauce and all these different things, and stock,
you're already adding lots of salt into, and that could just be the one meal that you've made. So, recommendations are less than 6 grams in a day. And a lot of those sort of pre-made seasonings are very, very high in salt. So what I would say is replace that, swap that, go for more herbs, spices, chilies, all those things are absolutely fine. They're not high in salt at all, but, going for the natural form of to season your food. When it comes to things like diabetes, of course, you have to watch your weight, but also how much sugar is in your diet. So you really want to be focusing on making sure that you're not having large portions of food. Try and start being a bit more conscious about how much food you're putting on your plate, being aware of, trying to have more fruits and vegetables throughout the day, but, trying to look at high fiber, whole grain options. So things like, brown rice, whole grain rice. If you do like making things like fufu or jollof rice, just try and make sure you're using, obviously yam is really high in fiber, but if you are going for things like jollof rice, making sure that try changing over to brown rice instead, because the fibre is really good for controlling blood sugar levels. And things like, if you do like rice and peas, adding those extra peas or beans, depending on what you use, depending on where you're from, obviously. You can add extra fibre into the meal that way, which is great. Also be aware that things like green banana, plantain, yam, cassava, dasheen, all those things are actually forms of carbohydrates.
High starches.
They're very high starches. They're resistant starches, which means they're very high in fibre and great for your gut health. But again, we're, within our culture, we're quite used to adding green banana, cassava, and yam all on one plate.
And dumpling as well.
And potentially you might also be having pounded yam as well. So it's really important that you you're conscious about your portion sizes. Try and go for just the one portion of a starchy carbohydrate on your plate, and try and load up your plate with more vegetables, more whole grain fibres.
Absolutely.
And leaner meats as well, and avoiding processed meats, because processed meats are very high in salt, but also very high in fat. So trying to limit, bacon, limiting things like sausages. All of those are quite processed meats. Go for more leaner proteins, eggs, beans, pulses, lentil, chickpeas, chicken, fish would be better options as well. If you like, I guess another example as well is if you like salt fish, salted cod as well, making sure you're soaking that for as long as you possibly can in the water to drain off as much salt. And again, don't then add high salt seasoning into that, because that then increases the salt content of that.
Yeah, I was sorry, my mum's clock's just gone off. And it's just as big as a Titanic.
That's the time.
It's that old Jamaican household with things like that. I've got 2 more questions for you. I think following on from that, I was going to ask how easy. I mean, you kind of went into it nicely there, about kind of limiting certain foods on the plate. But I think the biggest issue that we have in terms of changing our diet is it's culturally such a strong.
It's so ingrained.
It's so ingrained, and it's something that we've been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's like, how do we subtly make these changes without? I think food is like the core of our for most cultures. Actually, food is the core of the culture. But for us in particular, no matter where you are, there's food. Everything we do revolves around food. Parties, christening, wedding, whatever events, it's food, and it's and you have that typical meal and our diet. So how do we transition and change? I mean, I'm trying to think, like, how do I, if I said to my mum or my don't put that seasoning on there, they'd be like, no. They'd be straight up, no, it's not good, it's good. You know what they're like. So how do we influence, like, what would you think is the best way or tactic to kind of transition?
I mean, from my experiences, small changes, start small. Try not to do too much at once. And I think we almost need to, with the education and having resources, things like that you've got at the moment, the service that you have, which is amazing. I think it's about educating ourselves and also looking at preventative. We shouldn't be waiting until the worst happens before we start making changes. Absolutely. We already know that there's a lot of evidence and research to show that we need to cut down on salt. We need to, have more lower fat foods, go for more healthier fats. We know that already. So there's not really much else we can wait on for. We've got to make the changes now, but just start off with small changes as well. Doing a couple of things at a time rather than trying to do too much. It then becomes quite overwhelming, quite difficult to maintain that. So stick with realistic goals, things that that are achievable, SMART goals we call them. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely as well.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Catherine. It's been so informative. I've learned loads from this episode. So where can people find you? Where can they get some more information, see some of the work that you're doing?
You can find me. I'm on Instagram. My name is Caff, which is CAFF Dietitian, and that's my name for website as well, caffdietitian.com. So come say hello, give me a follow. I'm very chatty. So
brilliant. Thank you ever so much.
No problem.
Well, have a great evening. We hope that this has helped you. You'll be able to have access to this on podcast and on the website and on Instagram as well.